Hi, I'm Quatsi,
And I'm Lucretia.
and we are your Woke and Wealthy Coaches. Woke and Wealthy Coach is here to help you understand the value chain between work and wealth so that you can move from a life where you're spending all of your time working for money to a point where you have your money working for you.
Yeah, and a few other things I'll add to that. The Woke and Wealthy Coach is we're here for you. It's about you, you and the world and your community and these political systems, and how all of those things really relate to you achieving and maintaining wealth and awareness. So there's a level of awareness that we all need to really develop a strategy to move forward in life. And so we want to have some really balanced conversations around all of those topics to help you in your level of awareness to achieve a greater level of success.
That's right. That's right. Now, today, we want to spend some time talking about what's been in the news prominently and what's on everybody's mind, and that is the 2020 general election in the United States of America. Wow, what a show! And we have a lot of things that we want to talk to you about as it pertains to the election.
Yeah, we have quite a bit to unpack, and hopefully we'll be able to hit most of those items. Like Quatsi said, today's episode is about 2020 elections, and I'll start us off with the conversation on quoting some facts about where we are. We are approaching Monday, December 14th, and why is that date important, Quatsi?
Well, because that is the day that the actual Electoral College meets to formally vote to elect the President of the United States.
You might be saying Electoral College. I keep hearing all the buzz around in the Electoral College. I learned about that in legislative government, in high school, in college. But really, to me, it just seems like people in cloaks, and I have no true understanding about what the Electoral College is about. There's a big difference between the popular vote and the Electoral College vote. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more. As we move to Monday, December 14th, 2020, Electoral College's vote, we know a couple of things. President-elect Joe Biden is predicted to receive 306 of those electoral votes. The current president, Donald Trump, is predicted to receive about 232 of those Electoral College votes. We also know that President-elect Joe Biden also won the popular vote. And as we can see from the previous video, and we're going to talk about this a little bit more, there is a huge difference in the popular vote and the Electoral College vote. And this has made the difference in elections in the last 20 years a couple of times.
You know, to Lucretia's point, I looked up the statistics for all of the presidential elections for the last 20 years, from 2000 to today, and I noticed something very interesting. Whenever you had a non-incumbent Republican president win, and that is, you know, either the previous president had already served 2 terms and it was definitely going to be someone new, either on the Democratic side or the Republican side, or whenever you had a shift, whenever there was a current president and a new president was elected. That's what I mean by non-incumbent. So whenever a non-incumbent Republican president won in the last 20 years, two interesting things were the case. Number one, the percentage of registered voters that actually voted in the election was a bit on the low side. Number two, the Republican candidate lost the popular vote. And let me tell you specifically, we're going to show you some statistics for all the elections, but I want to call out a couple that are interesting. In November 7th, 2000, November 2000, in Bush versus Gore, Al Gore won 50,999 and change thousand votes. Bush won 50,456 votes. Yet Bush got 271 electoral votes, and Gore got 266 electoral votes. The total voter turnout among registered voters was 51.2. That was actually the lowest voter turnout in the last 20 years.
And he won that election by a mere hair. The requirement for the Electoral College votes to declare the presidency won is 270 votes. The prediction of having received 270 of the electoral votes.
Exactly.
And as we can see from Biden, President-elect Joe Biden, that there are 306 votes over 270. So they're quite an amount of votes. And the current president, Donald Trump, has only 232 projected or predicted votes. May I interject something here before we move on with the statistics? You may also be wondering who are the people that make up the Electoral College. These are elected officials in some cases. These are also political hopefuls, and I think you should be aware of that. They're political hopefuls, some of which are long-term party loyalists. So I don't know if that's going to mean anything going into Monday. But knowing that some of these people are political hopefuls of the Republican Party as well as long-term party loyalists, I don't know if we're going to see some surprises in the estimations that we're going in for Monday.
Exactly. And, you may be wondering, what all of the noise is about with respect to states like Georgia and Pennsylvania. As you can see, and we're not going to go into it in detail here. We'd like you to actually do some research on the number of electoral votes that are allocated to each state. One of the challenges you've got is that in some of these so-called battleground states where President-elect Joe Biden has won, it was a situation where the number of votes in that state between Joe Biden and President Donald Trump were relatively close. And when I say relatively close, I'm talking about, thousands or in some cases tens of thousands of votes. Because a lot of times the way most of the states work is the electors are allocated to whoever wins the popular vote in that state. And because the number of electors for each state isn't necessarily scaled with the size of the state per se. That's why there are certain states that, from an electoral perspective, from a perspective of the strategy of getting to 270 electoral votes, some states tend to be what they call battleground states. These are the states that will tend to make the difference between who wins and who loses. Now, to Macretia's point, one of the things that people have to understand is that the electors are actually the ones who make the votes. Now, in most cases, the elector will vote and is required by the law of the state to vote in a manner that is consistent with who won the popular vote in that state. There are cases where an elector, at least legally, may be allowed to vote in a manner that is different from the popular vote of that state. That is a situation called a faithless elector. It's a situation where the state has sent that elector to the Electoral College for the formal vote, and they vote differently than sort of the will of the people of that state. Now, um, one of the key elements of the Constitution that people need to understand is that the Constitution grants the states the right to conduct their elections according to whatever rules and process those states determine. And not all states have it set up the same way. Most most states in the Union, and again, you need to take the time to look this up, most states in the Union have some fairly hard legal constraints that prevent these so-called faithless electors, that prevent electors from voting in a manner that's different from the popular vote of that state. However, not all states have that. There are some states where you can theoretically vote different than the will of the people. And it's important to know which states those are.
And the question I would ask is, are these the states that are hanging in the balance? I mean, the ballots have been counted over and over and over with overwhelmingly the same result, right? That President-elect Joe Biden has won the popular vote and is predicted to receive 300 plus electoral votes. Every state that's brought a case forward so far, it's been denied by the Supreme Court. It hasn't moved forward. So, my question to you would be, are these states that you're mentioning that allow the faithless vote, are these the states that are hanging in the balance? Are any of them? The Pennsylvanias, the Georgias, the Nevada, the Arizona, the Michigan?
So, just doing a very quick internet search, there's states that have what they call laws that bind electors, that prescribe some penalty for faithless electors. Now, in this case, looking at this map, some of the states that provide no penalty for faithless electors, those states include Alaska, Florida, Alabama, Mississippi, Ohio, Wisconsin, Virginia, Tennessee, and there are a few others.
Interesting. So it doesn't sound like those are the states which we believe are hanging in the balance. Those states seem to be all Republican states for the most part. Those were all red states. If we look at the map, most of them were. There may be one or two that were not, but it sounds like they were all red states anyway. So it doesn't seem to look like there's much room to run, right? With the faithless voter type aspect.
Right.
However, there's a lot that's been going on, not only in the political arena, but we are Christians and we do pay attention to what's going on also in the spiritual arena. Looking at some of what I'm seeing happen in the church is quite disappointing, quite frankly.
Yeah, absolutely. We've seen instances where we have some preachers who have gotten up, some people who claim to be prophets, and they say that they have received a vision from the Lord, or the Lord has told them that Donald Trump will win the election, and then as it turns out, it does not appear that there's any way that can be the case. Although the game isn't over until the Electoral College votes on Monday. Right now, over the next 48 hours, it does not seem that there's any path for Donald Trump to win the election, because all of the legal challenges, absolutely every one of the legal challenges that have been made to attempt to eliminate or to disqualify the votes in those key battleground states, all of those legal challenges failed. And it's it's worth saying that the court opinions, again, if you look up on the web, on the internet, the court opinions have all stated that those that have brought the suits trying to get those votes eliminated and to get Donald Trump's loss reversed, they did not provide any significant evidence of voter fraud. Now, one thing I wanted to mention, one of the arguments um, that some of the people that have brought the suits have made is that mail-in mail-in ballots, mail-in votes were against the state constitution or against the U.S. Constitution. But here's the thing that I haven't really heard anybody say. For decades and decades and decades, we have been using mail-in ballots. For who? Those who serve in the United States military. Our soldiers. Remember, because you haven't really heard this preached on any of the major news outlets yet. Our soldiers who have served overseas during the time of a general election, they have been allowed to mail in ballots. Our soldiers who serve on naval vessels that are at sea during the time of a general election, they have been allowed to send in mail-in ballots
And their families.
and their families. And so those states that house and that where those soldiers live, all of those states have had provisions on the books for many, 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 many years that allow for mail-in ballots, and therefore somehow we didn't have a problem with that process before.
And I'll go back to mail-in ballots are simply paper ballots. We haven't been on electronic systems all that long.
Mm-mm.
So to really refute mail-in ballots is really to refute paper ballots. Paper ballots were, for
The
most of
standard.
the United States elections, paper ballots were the types of ballots that we had before. So we have to step back and look at the arguments. It just doesn't have that much credence. I'm not a lawyer. However, it just seems like when the narrative is not working in your favor, then the strategy is to attack the thing that is most powerful that could benefit you. And so I believe that the Republican Party has attacked the mail-in ballots because it was the mail-in ballots that really showed that people were giving more support to President-elect Joe Biden. As we remember the night of Super Tuesday,
Mm-hmm.
we woke up on that Wednesday morning, and it appeared, because the electronic ballots were calculated first,
Mm-hmm.
it appeared that Trump had beat Biden by a landslide. Now, what we did not know at that time is how many mail-in ballots each state had and what type of difference those ballots would begin to make in the numbers.
And it took several days for them to count.
Right.
We really didn't know much about the outcome of the election on election night because of the large number of mail-in ballots that had to be counted by hand and verified and validated.
So statistically speaking, those numbers were were a decent percentage of the number of voters. However, it wasn't enough to really determine the outcome. So the population was not a valid statistical population to really predict the election. And that is what they're wanting you to go on.
Mm-hmm.
On the night of election, the morning of Wednesday, November 4th, the votes were in Donald Trump's favor. But statistically speaking, we didn't have a majority of the
Of the
votes
votes counted.
in that number.
And first of all, I think it's worth saying, Macretia and I, from a political perspective, we are not Democrats and we are not Republicans. We are, no kidding, card-carrying independents. There are elections for which we have voted for largely Republican candidates. There are elections for which we have voted largely for Democratic candidates. As one of your woke and wealthy coaches, that's one of the first things I want to encourage you to do is don't give your allegiance, your vote, your attention to a candidate because they are of one political party or another. You have to evaluate candidate by candidate, situation by situation, policy by policy, who's really going to be on your team, who's really for you and who's not for you in terms of your freedom, in terms of your ability to make and capture and keep money, in terms of your ability um, to be safe from things and people that might harm you. Now, going back to what Lucretia was illustrating, let me return you to the statement I made earlier, which is that whenever there was a non-incumbent Republican president that won in the last 20 years, they had lost the popular vote but won the Electoral College vote, and the number of voters that turned out was on the low side. Now, let me tell you something interesting about this presidential election. First off, the voter turnout, and I'm talking about the turnout of registered voters. We're not even at the conversation yet about how many, what percentage of the population is registered to vote. That is a separate show. But of those who are registered to vote, the voter turnout was 66.7%. That is the largest voter turnout in United States history.
And I think before that, the presidential election, which Barack Obama won, was the largest voter turnout.
And that was 58.2%.
So we exceeded that by a huge margin. What was the difference? Do you know what the projected huge difference is there? I have some predictions, but I don't know them to be true. I think the millennial voters and the number of minority voters surged in this election. Generally, people between the ages of 18 to 25 don't feel it important to vote.
Yeah.
This was their election.
Yes, absolutely. And here's one of the key messages. If you go back and look at the statistics, elections that Democrats win, one of the things, at least over the last couple of decades, one of the things that they have in common is high voter turnout. So it's not an accident that you hear this narrative from a lot of politicians and legislators on the right talking about voter fraud, making sure that we purge the voter rolls so that we make sure that everybody that's registered has a right to be registered. Now, all of these things on the surface sound like they are promoting our democracy by making sure that the elections are done legally, that everybody who's registered to vote can vote. You've heard some assertions about illegal aliens or illegal immigrants being allowed to vote. But at the end of the day, what's really behind that? The statistics make it very clear. When voter turnout is low, Republicans tend to have the home court advantage because of the way electors are allocated in the states and where you find those strongholds of Democratic voters versus Republican voters.
No, I think those are very great points. I want to add a couple of things. What drives the voter turnout? We can look at this particular election and we can see that there were some social justice challenges. There were also some on the side of the right. I'm going to say there's this set of one issue voters that seems to think that God is only concerned with one or two topics. When we know that God is concerned about more than one thing, and we have a lot of people who dedicated their lives to one issue voting. And so that's always a thing for them. And it comes up every 4 years, every 2 years, over and over, whenever there's a justice that comes forth. Now, I'm not saying that their position or their stance is incorrect. I'm not here to really evaluate that. I respect people's right to support whatever issue they feel important or impressed to support. So I want to go on record as saying that. But what I do want to say about that type of strategy is it's not a balanced strategy.
No.
And you have to learn to weigh risk versus risk. When the boat is sinking and all you care about is your belongings, and if you start to go and grab your belongings, no matter what situation is occurring, then you drown.
Yeah.
Right? So you have to understand how to pivot. You have to understand how to evaluate all the data and information that's in front of you. And if you get back to that one issue, okay, well then maybe you have some flawed thinking.
Mm-hmm.
But what I will say is there's more on the table to consider than
Mm-hmm.
one issue. And so for our family, this year, more than any year in the last 20 years probably
Mm-hmm.
that we've been together, 20 some odd years that we've been together, we started looking at a number of things.
Yeah.
Right? Like you mentioned a minute ago, we do have Christian beliefs. We do have Christian beliefs. And we're not just saying that, we're
Yeah.
real Christians.
Yeah.
Um, but there were so many other things to consider as part of this election. And we'd be remiss if we went into that ballot thinking that one party represented the Christ like approach. Quite honestly, I didn't see any Christian values in
Mm-hmm.
either of the parties.
Not at the core.
And for those of you who've convinced yourself that one party is the Christian party, you might want to step back and look at all the ways in which that particular party is really not living in the ways in which Christ would like for us.
And so, it's time for us to go, but before we go, I do want to give you a homework assignment, and that is to go onto the internet and look at President-elect Joe Biden's campaign website. You'll find a policy document or platform that he calls Lift Every Voice, Plan for Black America. I want you to read that and look at it with a very critical eye and ask yourself, if these policies were implemented, if they resulted in laws or executive orders, what would it really mean? What would this element really mean? Would it benefit me, my family, my community as a black family, as a community of color? What elements don't really seem to address the needs and concerns of me and my family and my community as a black family, as a black individual, as a community of color? And we're going to have a conversation about that. But in the meantime, be sure to keep yourself very close to your news channel, your online news outlets, and look for the results of the Electoral College formal presidential election on Monday. And I want you to also look very carefully at the response and the rebuttals, the further commentary from people on both sides of the political aisle, both Democrats and Republicans. And it's certainly going to be something to behold. So, until next time, thank you for your attention. Thank you for your time, players. And remember,
Our message is relevant,
our message is woke.
but most importantly, our message will empower you.
Bye-bye.